if you are an outsider, I don't know. Isn't that a bit of a worry when the right wingers start embracing you and sort of liking what you're doing?
Oh,
Doesn't
well,
that
let's not
ring
forget.
off alarms
Let's
and
not
bells?
forget what else Bill English said yesterday. So he paid that compliment, which is great. But he did also acknowledge that he thought it was pretty unlikely that you'd see a Green National Coalition, for example.
Sure.
It's not all 11.
Okay, well, let's talk about that coalition, because I noticed a few people have tweeted asking about the coalition possibilities. Obviously, the official party policy is that you will consider it for the first time. In previous elections, you wouldn't consider a coalition with National, but that you say it's highly unlikely. I remember the first remit that went to the conference that you were looking at this and deciding was extremely unlikely, I think it was, and then it was changed to highly unlikely. Which one would you prefer?
Personally, I think they're much of a muchness. I think they convey
extremely
the same,
sort of suggests an even lower chance than highly.
Sure.
Or do you think it's semantics?
It's a little bit of semantics. I'm comfortable with highly unlikely. I think it's an accurate representation of both where the party is in terms of its collective thinking, and also of what's likely to happen, actually. You know? And someone described it as, it's like you've got the door open but you've got the chain still on. And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for where it is. We're sort of saying hello around the side of the door.
So you definitely do agree with the party's position on that, unlike, say, Catherine Delahunty, who was here a few weeks ago, and she effectively said she disagreed with it, and she so strongly disagreed with it that she would resign from Parliament if that actually eventuated in a coalition with National. Yeah,
well, I mean, I think it's important when talking about support arrangements with the governing party to be aware of the various kind of levels that there are. So as I understand it, Catherine's comment was talking about if there are Green Party ministers sitting around the cabinet table in a confidence and supply arrangement.
Oh, no, I don't think she necessarily cabinet table, but yes, ministers and the executive.
Sure. Yeah. And that is one category of support.
And I think that's become sort of the dividing line, whether you're in government or not. Do you have a minister? So New Zealand First in the last government did have a minister. So they were in government, even though Winston Peters tried to pretend they were in opposition at times.
I think it's about whether you've got ministers, and I also think it's about how you vote on confidence and supply.
But I don't think you could have a minister in a government without voting confidence and supply.
That's right. So those two things go together.
Yeah.
But there are other options. For example, for a while the Greens had an abstaining arrangement on confidence and supply with Labour and some government spokespeople. So there are different levels. And of course, what we have currently with National is a memorandum of understanding where we work on shared areas of policy interest with them, and the home insulation scheme is an example of that.
But the difference is that you're actually saying you would consider putting ministers into a government with National and consider giving confidence and supply to a National government.
Consider it, and we would consider it based on policy and what our policy priorities are.
So if they gave you enough policy.
Yeah, but the reason that we say that it's highly unlikely is because we've set out what our policy priorities are this election. They're about green economics, creating green jobs. They're about bringing children out of poverty, and they're about cleaning up rivers. And we look at our policies, our priorities, and how the National Party treats those three issues. And there's, at the moment, there's some areas of common ground actually, but not a lot. And so that's why we've said it's highly unlikely. We're basing that actually on the likelihood of them coming to the party on our policies. Okay,
looks like Joe's got a question about the national arrangement.
It's slightly off topic. You've raised the green issue of getting insulation into homes. And I was just wondering if the Green Party had any kind of ideas, or if you personally had any ideas how we can get insulation into student flats, because they're not homes and we don't control whether landlords place insulation in them.
Yeah, so that's right. The existing home insulation scheme we've got has been very successful at getting owner-occupied homes warmer, drier and healthier, and that's fantastic. But the next kind of great frontier, if you like, is in rental properties. So obviously many students are living in rental properties. In Dunedin, it's a particular issue of, I used to live here. I used to get ice on the inside of my windows in my flat in Dunedin. So we do need to look at ways that we can extend home insulation out into the rental property market. And part of our child poverty solution priority this election is about introducing minimum standards for rental accommodation. And that would go hand in hand with an extension of the home insulation scheme, so that there would be, financial support available to landlords to insulate those properties. It would help children living in rental properties, and equally it would help students. And Gareth Hughes, who's our tertiary education, youth and housing spokesperson, has been kind of championing that campaign around the country and visiting student flats. And
So does it worry you at all that effectively it's given National a stamp of environmental approval, and they go to the electorate and say, well, we work well with the Greens, we are an environmental party, an environmental government. So you give them some sort of credence?
I guess there's an element of that, but the home insulation scheme, both parties, it's a very, very successful scheme, and both parties are talking about how successful it has been. I think National's environmental record on other environmental issues, including climate change and water, for example, there's very little to recommend those policies, and I think people can see that.
On that subject as well, I read an argument that said that Rod Donald's Buy New Zealand Made campaign was potentially a strategically poor decision because it meant that it eroded the green brand by making it a government campaign. So I guess maybe
you're giving them part of your brand.
Yeah,
and part of working together with National in this memorandum of understanding, one of the things we have to make sure we do is continue to take credit for those things, and to make sure that credit is given where it is due as well.
Okay, now so back to this arrangement with National. I don't mean to bore you with this, but I really want to try and pin you down and be very clear about this. So, in the highly unlikely scenario that the Greens decide to support a National government, you wouldn't be unhappy with that?
I wouldn't be unhappy with that, because if that happened, it would mean they had come to the party on our key priority issues, and we would be advancing good green change in those areas.
So you'd be happy voting confidence supply to a National government?
To that hypothetical National government that would adopt our policies on children, jobs and rivers, I think that would be wonderful. I just don't think that's going to happen this election.
So it seems unlikely. It's just that, of course, in the past, we often have parties that say they're highly unlikely to go into government with certain parties, but they do. So if you look at, say, New Zealand First in 1996, they really disillusioned their supporters when they suggested they weren't going to go into with National. They did. Likewise, at the last election, the Māori Party essentially said it's highly unlikely we'll go on with National. They did. At the moment in the UK, Liberal Democrats, they've gone in after signalling they wouldn't. And so after the fact, people were saying, well, why didn't those politicians actually, be honest and straight up about it? And you guys are.
Yeah, I think we are. And I also think we've watched those examples that you mentioned and learned from those.
Yeah.
So we're looking at ways to advance good green change that avoid some of those pitfalls. And the memorandum of understanding that we have with National at the moment is an example of that. So we're trying to draw what we can from those lessons and be creative about ways that we can advance our policy agenda.
Okay. Now, also, inequality is an issue I know you feel passionately about. You've researched it a lot, so you're the smartest person in the room in terms of this, obviously. But so I wanted to sort of ask you a bit about that, because obviously, as you've pointed out, inequality has worsened in New Zealand significantly over the last 25 years. How would the Greens change it? Like, seriously change it, or are you just going to put on a Band-Aid?
I think it's a huge issue to tackle, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of different ways that you can begin to tackle the issue of income inequality. Some of them are about directly addressing income, because that's where the nub of the issue lies. So you can have policies that help to increase the income of those on the lowest. You can have redistributive tax policies that ensure that those on the highest incomes are contributing to closing the gap. And then you can have policies which deal with the outcomes of that inequality. So, home insulation actually is an example of that.
Sure.
Poor children living
so
in
on
poor
tax,
quality
for example,
houses.
would you reverse all the redistribution that's made the tax system less progressive over the last 25 years?
Yeah, I mean,
because we used to have much higher rates of tax now, like 50% for the rich, the highest rich. Would Greens go back to that? Or?
Our tax policy is very progressive, and one of the elements of it, in fact, is a tax-free band of $10,000. So, Labor's talking about a tax-free $5,000 a selection. Our policy's been 10 for some time.
But Mana, I see today, they've got a $26,000 band.
So, I mean, you've got to weigh up how much it's going to cost and the effect that it's going to have, and
So that,
at the moment, 10,000 is where we would set that. But there are other things. There are other things you can do to redistribute income within the tax system, and one example is working for families.
Yeah.
So, at the moment, those families on the lowest incomes with dependent children are generally those on benefits.
Yeah.
And the way working for families is structured at the moment is there's a tax credit available to low-income families with children whose parents meet a work test, but not for those who they actually may work up to, maybe a sole parent working up to 20 hours a week, but doesn't meet the work test, so doesn't get that extra support. So there are things we can do, like extending the in-work tax credit to beneficiary families, which will, redistribute income and help children.
Sure. So you've identified in the past basically Rogernomics and neoliberalism in the 80s and 90s as producing this great economic inequality. So what elements, if any others, would the Greens actually reverse about those, or do you accept that that's here to stay?
Well, I think it's a combination of those things. There's a combination of looking at where we are right now and what are the policies that are going to address children who are born right now into families where they don't have control, for example, over the level of their parents' income or where that income comes from, but they deserve a good start in life. So things we can do right now. And then looking more broadly at, for example, how we could redistribute and have a more progressive tax system. And that includes not only income tax, but taxes on capital gains and resource rentals as well. So ways to generate revenue that you can then use on good social policy.
Okay. Do you think we should have a GST? Do you believe in having a GST?
I don't think we would change GST as it is at the moment, but you
are in favour of GST essentially.
Well, you do have to inherit the economy that you have.
I know, but you've got your preferred policy prescriptions, and you have to choose which ones that your party endorses.
Yeah. So my answer to that is GST. I think we wouldn't tamper with it as it is now. But
so you prefer it at 15%?
Rises, no, we don't prefer it. But let's say you've got a Green Party government. You have to you have certain revenue streams, and you have to make sure that you're managing the economy that you've inherited, basically. So but it's it is very regressive on the poor, and the GST
so why not just get rid of
increase
it? Mana says, for example, who we're having John Minto on later, he says get rid of it, and the Mana Party are promising to get rid of GST. Yeah,
but I think you've got to be realistic about what you can do.
So realistic about inequality, that we have to accept it?
No, realistic about the economic infrastructure that we've inherited and how we can use that to minimise inequality.
But if you keep on endorsing what we've already got, aren't you then perpetuating the inequality in society as a party?
I'm not endorsing everything that we've already got. We would, for example, introduce a tax-free band of $10,000. Now that would go a long way towards mitigating some of the regressive impacts of GST.
What about free breakfasts and lunches in schools?
Yeah, fantastic idea.
The Greens.
So our policy is around investigating ways to provide that.
Why not just say you'll do it rather than all this investigating? It seems, I don't know. I just get the sense that voters think, all parties are always saying we'll investigate and think about it, and without just saying we'll do it.
Yeah, well, I think we'd investigate it, we'd find out how to do it, and then we would do it.
Well, it just seems a bit...
At the moment, we don't have access to Treasury to tell us, how much our policy is going to cost and how you're going to
decide on what's right and proper in terms of inequality and things.
No, we would give them the policy and get them to cost it for us.
Treasury are never going to be supportive of getting rid of inequality, are they?
I believe Treasury is there to work for the government of the day, so...
Okay. Okay. What about tertiary education? Should it be free?